Today I'm going to talk about female dominance hierarchies, and specifically in the context of modernity. Now, most of us are familiar with male dominance hierarchies. I've talked about it a lot over the years, specifically how the male dominance hierarchy is structured and what it looks like, and it's fairly familiar to most people. Probably is important to compare and contrast the two, but the female dominance hierarchy is quite different. But let's first go over the male dominance hierarchy, of course. The male dominance hierarchy tends to be very structured and ordered, and it usually is defined by leadership roles and subordination, but with an orderly manner to it. And it's not necessarily about suppressing or inflicting harm on other people, and it tends not to be ruled by emotion. There's a chain of command, as it were, and everyone has an important role. The leader, you could say, is the most important component of it, but the leader really is just one link in the chain. And leadership is generally established on grounds of, genetics and all the things that are derivative from that, as well as environmental boons. A tall, intelligent man is much more likely to be a leader than a short, intelligent man or a short and dumb man, etc. But it's about status primarily, and men with different stations will be accorded different status, and they will fit within that hierarchy in a different manner, and they will fit within said hierarchy in a different way. Tends not to be very cattish or hennish, which is the way I would describe female dominance hierarchies. Now, female dominance hierarchies are not ruled by the same order of the day that male dominance hierarchies are. They are about status, because all hierarchies are ultimately about status, but they don't have that same structure. And I'm going to relay an anecdotal example, one that I have heard, but also one that I'm familiar with, having listened in on and heard about via my own experience and other people's, of the type of female dominance hierarchy that manifests itself in the modern context. A while ago, one of my long-term subscribers was telling me a story about when he was effectively working as a chauffeur, as a driver around several university campuses. And the young girls or women, late teens, early 20s, would jump from party to party, and in this cab or in this vehicle, they would discuss what they were going to do. And he would tell me how shocked he was at how lewd and absolutely flagrant they were in the details of what they were going to do and their intentions. When I mean open and flagrant, they were, according to him, and I've heard similar things myself, very, very clearly talking about and arguing about fighting, catfighting, about who would get to suck X person's dick, who would get to fuck another person, and just going through turns, basically rotation of acquiring, I guess you could say, the top male picks in their circles, and which of the girls would get primary access to them. Now, it's not a secret that men to some degree do that. Of course, they will try to acquire primary female goods, the most attractive women, but it's very rare they go into all that detail. It's more about the conquest, as it were, as it relates to status, because attractive women are a status symbol, and much less about the nitty-gritty details of what acts were performed. But in the case of women, there's something different operative here. Now, a woman who's not past the wall in her prime of her youth, say 18 to 25, her primary assets are body and her looks. And so when she is working within the female dominance hierarchy, which tends to be very hennish and peckish and cattish, one of the ways of displaying high status in that dominance hierarchy in an unconstrained, unrestrained modern environment is getting primary sexual access to whomever is regarded as the top male. So let's say you have female A, B, C in this scenario. Female A is able to perform certain acts and get sexual access to whomever they regard as the best male available. That shows her status, as it were, in the hierarchy, and shows that at least nominally she is regarded as the most attractive, and that she has the goods to deliver. And inasmuch as other women in this theoretical example, or not so theoretical as it were, get later access, it shows that they're lower down in the hierarchy. Notice how the difference between male and female dominance hierarchies in this case is that the female dominance hierarchy is, in this specific instance, as it relates to status, a lot less cooperative than the male one. As I said in the beginning, male dominance hierarchies tend to have leadership roles. Doesn't have to be just one person, but usually it is. And a chain of subordination, as might be found, say, in the military, which is very typical of male dominance hierarchies. But people aren't being, quote-unquote, shat on, and they're not necessarily being poorly treated merely for being in the middle or at the bottom or whatever. In a sense, it's sort of each according to his ability. No, I'm not invoking Marx here, but you get the picture I'm trying to paint. With women, it's much more chaotic, and with females, these young females in particular, the establishment of this dominance hierarchy in the unconstrained environment of modernity is delineated by which female grants sexual access to whatever the top males are, and who gets first dibs. And this is something you just don't really see amongst men. Again, men engage in these sorts of things, but they're much less about the act, and they're more about the conquest. And a man's primary asset can be his physicality, but it's comparatively rare when we speak of men and women. Compared to women, men have to walk the double walk, as it were. They have to have the looks. In addition to that, they have to have the status, which may or may not be related to their looks. But I think the interesting thing, and I've seen these, incidentally, I've seen these things before. I've observed them, I've heard them, women going into absolute graphic detail and fighting over the gibs, effectively, of which males they're going to pounce on. Now, this was not necessarily as operative a principle in former times. I say as operative because this is not a new behavior. Inasmuch as this acquaintance of mine was shocked at experiencing this and then relaying this information to me, and many people would be shocked to hear this, going into very, very lewd details about who's going to do what and who's going to do it first, and just cycling through the men, basically, repeatedly. This is obviously innate behavior. But in former times, there was that shame factor. Now, Western civilization as a whole is not a shame society, and I've gone into the details on the difference between shame and guilt society and all these things. But this would have been regarded as shameful behavior. And indeed, women still engage in slut-shaming. The biggest slut-shamers are women. It's a way of lowering a woman's status in the eyes of the many, in the eyes of other women, in the eyes of men. A man might fuck a slut, but he probably won't really be terribly attached to her. But I think we've reached maybe a new level of the unconstrained, inasmuch as, yes, there are things such as slut-shaming, and shame does still exist, but the way women go about this, this has been effectively lost in these youthful circles of girls. So, effectively, in this specific semi-new format of female dominance hierarchy, sluttiness, if as it were, achieves the high status. If you're the girl who is, in theory, the most attractive, you will get first dibs on sexual act or giving sexual access to the men, and that will mark you out as the dominant female in that particular circle. And again, I don't think this is anything new. I think this potential always was there, and it probably did express itself. It's just never as vividly and as directly these days. It goes without saying that this probably isn't the best approach for females to work within dominance hierarchies. Not much really has changed in the male dominance hierarchy, because cooperation is the name of the game in the male dominance hierarchy. For subordinates, people in the middle, at the top, it forms a chain. Each person's part of the link. That's not the same thing as scratching and screeching your way to the top in a female dominance hierarchy. And there are other tricks that women, of course, employ, having fat, unattractive girlfriends, for example, that highlight how attractive the female in question is, etc. But everybody knows that there's increased likelihood in divorce and all kinds of relationship dysfunctionality for women and people in general, also men, but specifically for women who engage in this kind of blatant, flagrant sexual activity. And I think inasmuch as this is not necessarily a new precedent, but an innate behavior that has been given life and breadth beyond the scope of what is beneficial and healthy and good, I definitely think this is a negative thing. Female dominance hierarchies have never really been, I would argue, as productive as the type of dominance hierarchies that are established amongst men. Prehistorically, men had to work together to survive, to get things done, whilst women were doing more minimal tasks or cowering in the huts. So there's a reason why you're not going to get the kind of cooperative, useful dominance hierarchies. I've been over these articles where all-female offices, they're awful. They're just a bunch of emotional screeching and fighting over things and fighting over men, and it's intolerable. There was a female, this was years ago, I think I covered this, remember that, a couple of years back, all-female office that she just gave up on, and she doesn't ever want to do that again because they can't focus on the work. And so you could imagine in a party situation or a social situation how that works. It's terrible. Now, we don't have the resources to shame people like this, which would be a useful tool. But maybe through communication and information, some women at least will become aware that this is not a very useful behavior to engage in, not the least of which because it endangers people's health, that type of blatant, flagrant sexual activity. But it probably would be more useful to go back to the more standard way of establishing female dominance hierarchies vis-a-vis direct relationships and attachments to high-status males, as opposed to just, well, fucking your way to the top, which is, these days, more or less, at the very least, one of the sanctioned ways to do this. Anyway, I didn't want to talk too much about this because I might make a video, a much more detailed video on female dominance hierarchies, but I thought this was interesting to cover and see how times have shifted in this regard. Everyone, I will check you out, hopefully, later, assuming I'm still alive. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.